concludes the Select Committee statement. We now move to the general debate on the UK-India Free Trade Agreement, and I call the Minister to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. Let me start, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying why this deal is so important. It may seem obvious, I suppose. We did £47.2 billion worth of trade with India last year, up 15% year on year, and India is now our 10th largest trading partner. But it is its future potential that really stands out. India has the highest growth rate in the G20. It's likely to become the third largest economy in the world by 2029. And by 2050, India will be home to over 250 million high-income consumers. Demand for imports is due to grow as well, reaching £2.8 trillion by 2050. Assuming global foreign direct investment into India continues its recent trajectory, it could grow to £1 trillion by 2033. Yet, despite all of this, its markets also have been behind some of the highest barriers in the world. India has some of the highest tariff rates in the G20, gin and whiskey at 150%, cars at 110%, cosmetics at 22%, soft drinks, lamb, fish, chocolate and biscuits, I know that's an odd combination, but nonetheless at 33%. In 2024, India was ranked as the 8th most restrictive services market by the OECD. Inevitably, that means that either prices many UK products out of the market or makes them a premium product beyond the reach of many in India. Yet 42% of UK businesses surveyed by Grant Thornton in 2024 said they'd want to build a presence in India. 72% said an FTA would encourage them to explore the Indian market. So the agreement this government secured was a momentous achievement. Others have been trying to get a deal like this for years and failed. But this Prime Minister, along with the then Business Secretary and Trade Minister, to whom I paid tribute, brought home the goods. Oh dear. I will. I think I know what he's going to say.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is the single largest importer of Indian ceramics. The trade deal removes some of the tariffs that we apply onto Indian imports, which means that the industrial energy pricing in India, with the removal of those tariffs, means that they become incredibly competitive to our own domestic market, in some cases much below our own market production point. Bricks are another area where we are the single largest importer of Indian bricks, and yet our own brick kilns stand at 2/3 capacity. So is the Minister able to set out what protections are in this trade deal to make sure that whilst we get the new markets for our exports, we don't undercut our own domestic market by cheaper imports?
Minister.
I thought he might be going to talk about ceramics because he regularly speaks up both privately and in public on behalf, privately to me and publicly in the House and elsewhere on behalf of his constituents, and of course he's quite right to do so. As he knows, I visited some of the businesses in his constituency, and I am very keen to make sure that we can do everything, that we do everything in our power within the department to support, protect and enhance the British ceramics industry, which is a really important part of our work. I would just say to him that the overall impact, we believe, of this agreement on the ceramics industry will be limited because 543 out of 577 steel lines, for instance, were already at 0%. The remaining 34, which we brought to 0% as part of the deal, all currently have tariffs of just 2 or 3%. So India is not a prominent source of imports for those sectors. I accept the broad issues that there are for the ceramics industry. I don't think that and I've seen everything that Mr. Flello, who's a former denizen of this place, has produced. I don't think that this agreement is the problem. There are other issues that we need to address, not least the issues that he's raised in one sec, that he's related in relation to energy costs, which are very specific for the ceramics industry, of course.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Just before he moves off this point, the evidence that we took on the Select Committee did raise concerns about the impact of this deal on both the brick industry in the UK and the ceramics industry. The Minister knows that the Trade Remedy Authority is not really equipped with the tools that it needs to defend us in this new world, and nor is the Competition Market Authority yet seen fit to finalise its foreign subsidy control regime, despite 2 years of consultation. So will the Minister at least assure the House that he will keep a very close eye on this and not hesitate to bring forward protections or trade remedies if the need arises?
Minister.
Yes, of course. And I read the report of his committee over the weekend, and it's a very fine report. Indeed, some of the things I've already said I've lifted straight from his report. So, and I think, broadly speaking, I get the impression that it might be that the House is content to proceed, and certainly the committee was content to proceed with the agreement. And he will also know, of course, that I guaranteed to him that we would have a debate during the Crag period, and we are now having a debate in the House during the Crag period. He makes a good point about the trade remedies, and of course we've always, I mean, there's a whole series of sectors where we need to keep our review alert to that. But I would just say to him again, there may be some points you might want to make later on about labour in relation to the brick industry as well, but because they're made in his report. But nearly 90% of ceramics imports from India already come in tariff-free into the UK. And so I'm not sure that this is the particular sector or that this agreement is going to provide the particular problem that, that some in the sector expect. So to go back to the agreement, it goes well beyond India's precedent, opening the door for UK businesses. As the Select Committee says in its report, the UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, is the UK's most economically significant bilateral free trade agreement since leaving the European Union. In just 1 second, if he doesn't mind. It boosts UK GDP by £4.8 billion, which is 0.13% of GDP. It boosts wages by £2.2 billion, and it boosts bilateral trade by £25.5 billion every year in the long run by 2040. India will drop tariffs on 90% of lines, covering 92% of current UK exports, giving the UK tariff savings of £400 million a year immediately on entry into force, rising to £900 million after 10 years, even if there is no increase in trade. India's average tariff will fall from 15% to 3%. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his enthusiasm and his energy on this job that he does as Minister. I think we welcome the tariff. The 2025 UK-India Free Trade Agreement was projected to make some £50 million boost for Northern Ireland's economy. First of all, the tariffs are reducing on the whisky, which means that 3 distilleries in my constituency, Acklandville, Hinch and the Demon, all will take advantage. There's also some opening markets that was referred to for manufacturing and engineering. But the only thing is, Madam Deputy Speaker, 6 months after the agreement, Northern Ireland, with great respect, has not seen much happening just yet. I know the Minister's keen to make it happen. Can I ask him, please, when will it happen for Northern Ireland? Thanks so much.
Minister.
I think the Honourable Gentleman is a teetotaler. Is that right? Yeah, sometimes. A tea slightler, a tea occasionaler, not total. Only in the early morning. All right, well, I got that completely wrong. Anyway, I think all honourable members want to celebrate the fact that we're managing to get the whisky tariffs down from 150% to 75% and then down to 40%. That will be absolutely transformational. And I was with... it's not just, incidentally, about whisky itself. I was with Fevertree, the senior, one of the founding members of Fevertree the other day, and they were making the point that it's also about soft drinks, and it's also about the soft drinks that go with the whisky. So ginger ale, classic instance. Fevertree, if we can get Fevertree ginger ale to be going out to India at the same time, or for that matter, who knows, maybe even Indian tonic water, then that is a significant benefit for us. Just on the timing, he makes a perfectly legitimate point, which is that lots of companies are saying to me, well, when's it all going to start? When's it all going to start? Well, we have to go through a ratification process, and then, which is part of what this is now. India has its own process, which is largely in the hands directly of Mr Modi, but I'm very confident that that can happen fairly swiftly, and I very much hope that in the next few weeks and months we will be able to declare a date for entry into force. There's always this slight moment between the moment of concluding the negotiations, the signature, the ratification, and then entry into force. You can't ever be precise about the date of entry into force until ratification has proceeded. But we are working as fast as we possibly can. There's one other element that we always said that we wanted to get to happen simultaneously, which is the double contributions agreement, which the HMRC are negotiating with India. And as soon as all of that is completed, then I hope we'll be able to get to entry into force. In the meantime, well, I'll come on to some of the implementation stuff. Madam Deputy Speaker, I should just say that I slightly confused all my tariff lines a little bit earlier between steel and ceramics, we'll tidy that up a little bit later if that's all right with you. Madam Deputy Speaker, every region and nation will benefit from the agreement, including £210 million boost for the North West, driven by aerospace and automotive wins, £190 million boost for Scotland, supported by cuts on whisky and satellite tariffs and financial services access, and £190 million boost for the East of England, generated through tariff cuts and improved rules for medical device and clean energy products. There are some big winners. I've already talked about whisky. We estimate that exports will increase by £230 million, an 88% increase. For autos, these will be going from over 100% tariffs to 10% under quota, which will phase from combustion engines, to electric vehicles. Auto parts and car engine exports are expected to increase by £189 million. That's 148%. And cosmetics, these tariffs will be falling from 20% to as low as 0%, which will boost exports by £400 million. That's 364% increase. And when I was talking to Charlotte Tilbury the other day about this, she was absolutely... I know the whip is very keen on Charlotte Tilbury. I'll pass on her request for further information. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, you're putting in a bit as well now. But the important point is we need to make sure that businesses know that there is this new opportunity out there in India, and we need to maximise the exploitation of these new tariff issues. Oh, yes, OK. I'll pass on his to Charles.
Giving way. And according to the government's own figures, this trade deal will only add 0.14% to our national GDP. What are we giving up in return for that measly amount of benefit? And is it really worth sacrificing our commitments to human rights to sign these kind of trade deals with countries and leaders who are reported to have breached human rights?
Minister.
Well, I'll talk about human rights in a moment, but to be honest, if he can come up with a better way of finding 0.14% of GDP increase, then I'd be very happy to hear it. But frankly, the idea that we would just turn our back on one of the biggest economies in the world, one of the largest democracies in the world, and not say yes to a trade deal with them, I think is for the birds. Just on human rights, of course, there are a whole series of human rights issues that we always want to raise with our trade partners, and we do so. When we're negotiating a free trade agreement, they're not necessarily a central part of it, but in this deal, for the first time ever, we have clauses on a whole range of human rights-related issues. He could easily point out that these are not legally enforceable, but they are an opportunity for us, both at the first review, which will come at entry into force, and at future occasions, which are laid out in the free trade agreement, for us to be able to further talk through some of these issues. I would also point out that, of course, human rights issues are primarily the responsibility of the SCDO. There's a series of these, whether it's in relation to Kashmir or it's in relation to some of the individuals and labour laws and so on, that we raise through the FCDO. Now, I'm aware that non-tariff barriers are also being removed to make trade quicker, cheaper and easier. through improved customs processes, reductions in technical barriers to trade, increased facilitation of digital trade, supportive IP commitments and greater collaboration on new technologies. This will all help to make trade quicker, cheaper and easier. In relation to services, which is obviously very important for us as a services superpower, market access is locked in, including ensuring UK companies are treated on an equal footing with Indian companies. The deal includes India's first ever financial services and telecoms chapters. The FTA is expected to boost services exports by £1.6 billion. In relation to procurement, and this is very important for the UK again, brand new access to India's federal procurement market will be locked in, guaranteeing access to approximately 40,000 tenders per year, worth at least £38 billion per annum, and exclusive treatment for UK companies. For the first time, UK companies will have access to India's procurement portal. I hope colleagues will agree that the CETA is a good deal for the UK, but I want to respond to a couple of points made by the Select Committee in its report. Firstly, the deal is only of any use if it actually gets used by UK companies. We know that it won't always be plain sailing, thanks to varying rules in different states and provinces, a point that was made in evidence given to the committee. The staging of a tariff liberalisation will need explaining, and non-tariff barriers can be just as important as tariff barriers. As the First Minister for Trade Policy and Exports, I'm keen to ensure that businesses have all the support they need to exploit this deal. That's why we are protecting the DBT team in India and why we have already engaged with more than 5,000 UK businesses on how to exploit the CETA through guidance, events and roadshows. It's not just Scotch whisky, as I said earlier, it's Fever Tree ginger ale to go with it and their Indian tonic water. We've also provided specific support to the UK cosmetics industry to exploit the cut in cosmetics tariffs, which will benefit companies like Charlotte Tilbury and Paw Paw. And once we get to the entry into force, as the committee suggests, we will monitor the operation of the CETA's provisions, including through the regular reviews that are built into the agreement. This is also not the full stop in our developing relationship with India. Vision 2035, agreed with India alongside the Free Trade Agreement, sets out a shared framework for deeper cooperation across technology, defence, climate and strategic exports, reinforcing the long-term direction of the bilateral partnership. We will also try and resolve other market access issues not solved in the Free Trade Agreement, for example, legal services, recognition of qualifications and other specific state-level barriers. And the UK is open to continuing negotiations for a bilateral investment treaty as long as it works for UK businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, this is a trade agreement, but I want to assure colleagues that it also promotes British values. We secured India's first ever chapters on anti-corruption, consumer protections, labour rights, environment, gender and development. And the agreement includes the strongest environmental commitments India has ever made in an FTA. Our key commitments and red lines have been maintained throughout, including protecting the NHS, ensuring that our immigration system is not affected, carving out defence and protecting our export controls, excluding sensitive agricultural sectors, including pork, chicken, eggs and milled rice, maintaining our food standards and animal welfare levels, and keeping CBAM out of the deal. Plagiarism, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the sincerest form of flattery, so I'm glad that the European Union have now reached political agreement on their own FTA with India, where it seems the UK deal was used as a baseline. But the UK retains first mover advantage. I'm hopeful we will get to entry into force before the end of the summer, so UK businesses can start exploiting these reduced tariffs this year, while the EU will still take some time to achieve ratification. And only the UK has secured access to India's £38 billion federal procurement market. Let me, Madam Deputy Speaker, make one final point. The UK is a trading nation. We rely on free and fair trade, and we believe that global trade needs a set of rules. The World Trade Organization will meet in Cameroon in the next few weeks. We believe it needs upholding and reforming so that it can tackle the challenges of today, including electronic commerce, unfair subsidies, dumping, secure supply chains with agility and dependability. But we also believe that trade agreements such as these along with our membership of the CPTPP, help secure our prosperity and enhance our international standing. We are still pursuing new or enhanced deals with the GCC, with Turkey, with Switzerland and with Greenland, and we are completing the text of our economic prosperity deal with the United States of America and our deal with the European Union. I commend this deal to the House and congratulate the former ministers who secured it.
The question is that this House has considered the UK-India Free Trade Agreement. Shadow Secretary of State Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm delighted to see not just the Minister, the excellent Minister for Trade, but also the Secretary of State. I read that I did just bank the win. I read that he's being earmarked as a caretaker Prime Minister, so we're pleased that he's got the time to spend with us. I think there's 10 minutes before colleagues can run upstairs. Richard Cobden said, "I believe that free trade will do more to civilise the world than all the treaties of peace that have ever been signed." He was the former Member of Parliament for Stockport, but he was a resident in my own West Sussex constituency near Midhurst. And his advocacy of free trade, including in this House, was always about its benefits for ordinary people: cheaper food, higher wages, and fewer incentives for people to wage those destructive wars that had a huge impact on ordinary people. We agree, and these benches will always be the party of free trade where it benefits our country. That is why it was a Conservative government that signed new landmark trade agreements with the EU, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and negotiated the entry of the UK to the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's why it was the Conservative government that laid the foundations for this free trade agreement with India. And let's be absolutely clear, this agreement is a tangible benefit of the decision that the British people made in 2016 to leave the political institution of Europe. The fruit of the independent trade policy we regained, allowing the United Kingdom to negotiate once again as a sovereign state, just like Canada, Australia and Switzerland. Britain first, not Britain hoping against experience that its interests would float to the top of a soup of 27 other conflicting flavours. Madam Deputy Speaker, since July 2024, the Indian economy has grown by 11%. For context, the European Union has grown by 1.9% in the same period, and under this government, the British economy has grown by just 1.6%. Exports matter. So this deal has the potential to be a key part of a growth plan for our economy. However, as any business leader will tell you, the devil is not just in the detail of such deals, but also what's not in them. I welcome the excellent report by the Select Committee, very thorough and important part of the scrutiny process of this House. We're a nation where services represent nearly half of our global exports. And I'm afraid that it appears the government has accepted a deal that is disappointingly thin on the sectors where Britain leads the world. The inclusion of services in this deal was the number one priority of the previous government's negotiations. Instead, this deal settles for locking in existing levels of liberalisation, all good, but rather than breaking new ground on services. There's an absence of provisions for mobility to allow our service industries to really integrate in India, restricting our consultants, engineers and architects from practising on the ground. Oh, happy.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I wonder if my honourable friend reflects on the views that I hear a good deal from a constituency that contains very many entrepreneurs, both of Indian heritage and with connections to business in India, that this is a deal which shows a government that is not listening to the voice of business that has that level of experience, because it misses out, as he's describing, on so many of the opportunities that those existing business links contain?
Well, I was going to be generous to the government and say something slightly positive. I mean, my honourable friend is absolutely right that governments of all flavours could do an infinitely better job of listening to businesses. They're the people at the front line in the real world, and as his constituents, I know, have very deep links to the economy of India, and it represents a real opportunity. And so whilst we support this deal, the only tone today is one of slight regret about the missed opportunities. Of course, it's easy to get a deal if you take the deal that is being offered rather than negotiate and seek to improve that deal. And I think therein is some of the difference between the approach of our government and where this... Well, we didn't get it because we weren't willing to take the deal that was on the table. We were holding out and negotiating for a better deal. Let me give the Minister an example of that, a quite surprising example in many ways, which is the complete omission of a legal services sector deal from this agreement. The Law Society, not myself, called this a missed opportunity for a significant breakthrough. The chair of the Bar Council said it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity missed. How ironic, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a government of lawyers, led by lawyers, stuffed full of lawyers, could not even get that aspect of this agreement across the line. The deal places a 36-month target, and I hope it's a target, not an aspiration or an ambition. It places a 36-month target for the conclusion of a mutual recognition of a professional qualifications agreement. That would be a great opportunity, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our service sector would welcome that, but I hope the Minister agrees with me that to not achieve that now would be to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. It would be a humiliation for this government, and I hope that he or she will address in the wind-up the precise plans to secure that agreement. And in a similar vein, Madam Deputy Speaker, the bilateral investment treaty that was planned to be agreed at the same time as in the original objectives for our deal has also not been delivered. This is the deal that was offered rather than the deal that could have been negotiated and improved. That leaves British investors exposed to sudden policy changes, unfair treatment and expropriation. Now, I could be, of course, talking about the policies of this government, but in this case, I'm talking about the Indian government and the jeopardy for some significant British investors. So again, another missed opportunity, a deal that we support, but a deal that could have been better. And I understand that the chief negotiator on the deal has confirmed there are no plans, sadly, to return to the table to get an investment treaty across the line, but I would very happily be corrected by that. And again, perhaps the wind-ups could address that point. Madam Deputy Speaker, as we heard from the Minister, on day one, the deal will grant Indian exporters of such wonders as textiles, gems and engineering goods immediate duty-free access to the British market. This is a welcome deflationary measure. It will come as good news for households as the price of goods in their weekly shops fall. Leather shoes, clothes, home furnishings and more will be cheaper under this deal. However, it is disappointing that this welcome reduction in tariffs is very far from symmetrical. Indian exporters benefit immediately, whilst British exporters sit in the waiting room. Scottish whisky producers, we've heard about, manufacturers of electric vehicles, the medical consumables industry, and chemical producers will have to wait between 5 to 10 years before tariffs are fully reduced. For car manufacturers... Yeah, please.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. He mentioned whisky briefly there, and it's broadly welcomed by the Scottish whisky sector. And I've certainly welcomed it myself as an MP for a constituency with 49 distilleries. I am trying to visit them all. However, he talks about asymmetry in the deal, but is there not asymmetry as well within Labour government policy between the export deal, where they're trying to get the best possible deal for whisky, while whisky is still paying the highest levels of duty for alcohol in the UK, and that's putting undue pressure on a sector that's already under pressure?
Good question. Well, my honourable friend makes an important point. It is not easy, and I don't want to just simply agree with him for the sake of it. It is not easy for chancellors of whatever flavour to balance the books. But where we've got such wonderful industries as the whole of our drinks and spirits, and indeed, if I may say so, our British or English wine industry, that our government does everything that we can to promote them, and Welsh and other parts of this wonderful kingdom. It's important that the government does everything. So I think, by and large, this government, as the government before, has got the importance of the wonderful Scottish whisky industry, but anything that can be done to help, and of course, the way that one reduces taxes over time is by making those hard, tough decisions on government spending. And I would say that's one of the key things that this side of the House would do in order to be able to lower those taxes. Now, the honourable member has left, but he made for Stoke-on-Trent Central, but he made a very important point about the protection of ceramics and related industries such as bricks, our energy-intensive chemicals industry are all important. Now, a trade deal, however wonderful this may or may not be, will do nothing, Madam Deputy Speaker, to help the ruinously high energy costs that the ceramics, the brick, the chemical industry and so many other address. This is not a debate about that today, and it's not the responsibility of the Minister, but nevertheless it's a very important sector, and if we're going to lower barriers, lower frictions, so that we can boost trade, increase the prosperity of our citizens, grow our economy, that absolutely has to involve the full stack, including energy, including what one does about employment law and regulation as well.
Very grateful to him for giving way, and I hope I'm not stretching the bounds of the debate excessively, but I'd be interested to know whether the agreement has any implications for defence exports to India, and if it does, what safeguards would be in place given the unhealthily close relationship between India and Russia?
The document that the Select Committee produced do lay out the impact, modest I believe as it is, for defence. I'll let the government benches answer the question, the important question about security, and I'll happily give way to the Secretary.
Talk through the honourable gentleman to the right honourable gentleman. Obviously, our export control system for any exports from the UK into any other country in the world bears in mind a diversion from one country to another. So that's a very important part of what we look at. The FTA doesn't affect that process at all.
Thank you. I hope my colleague, my honourable friend, is reassured to a degree by that. I'll move on briefly, and the Deputy Speaker will be pleased to know that the agreement is not my speech is not as comprehensive as the work of the Select Committee. I'd be grateful if the government would clarify a few points about the position on food and agricultural products. There are protections for sugar, chicken, eggs and pork, which has been welcomed by producers, but there are concerns from the British dairy industry about opening the market. They describe this as a one-way street, since dairy is excluded from UK exports to India, and yet the deal removes tariffs on Indian dairy coming into the UK. We will not keep doing it.
Up as we're going along, if that's okay. So just one particular. So just in relation to dairy, I understand the point, and the point has been made to me, and it was made in committee as well. I'm not aware of any Indian cheese company that has been able to export into the UK, because it would still need a licence. And one of the things I was very keen, and we were very keen to secure, is that we're not abandoning any of our food standards in the UK, which obviously have to be met before any export could come here.
Thank you. I'll try and leave the Minister with a short list rather than we go through each and every one. There are concerns, notwithstanding what the Minister has just said, so perhaps we can revert to this later. There are concerns also about hypocrisy of the government in respect of pesticides and animal, but particularly crustacean welfare. Now, I don't know if he's quite the same degree of expertise in crustacean welfare or prawn eye stalk ablation, which sounds, more trivial here than it would if you are the prawn whose eye stalks are being ablated, particularly when the government publish and vaunt their virtue in terms of animal welfare. And yet these poor blinded prawns seem to be victims under this deal. Well, I'm very, very happy to give way on the prawn eye stalk ablation. But it is an important point, and perhaps, again, in winding up, the Minister can make more general point about trade deals, about how they're going to protect animal welfare and food safety standards.
I thank him for giving way. Do prawns feel pain?
I'm in no way qualified to answer that. However, it is the government's position, and the government should speak to this, about crustacean welfare, and they published just before Christmas a very significant proposal to change the law on that. Now, this is a point, as ever in trade, not about the underlying fundamentals on which the Minister, I did part of his job as Minister for Exports, will be advised by government scientists and others. It's a point about the symmetry and the balance of that issue.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. He will recall, as I do, that during the debates about post-Brexit trade agreements, the highest possible standards of animal welfare were a cross-party, across-the-House issue frequently raised. And the point he makes is about swapping prawns caught in British waters to the highest possible standards and other types of seafood with creatures that are reared in a method that involves pulling off their eyeballs whilst they're alive in order for them to lay more eggs so that more prawns can be produced more cheaply, which I think we would agree is cruel and would not meet the expectations that were set out cross-party by this House. So does he agree with me that it is a powerful point and goes to illustrate the asymmetry in this deal, which he is seeking, quite rightly, to criticise?
Well, my friend puts the point in better and a more informed way than I do. And it is an important point, and I think it is one for the government to set out very clearly how they propose to maintain or create a level playing field on these matters so that producers who are operating here to British standards are not disadvantaged whilst we all get the benefit of trade and prosperity of which I spoke at the beginning. I will defer to the Minister on his prawn eye stalk ablation.
I mean, it is a serious point, and we're all joking about it, but it is a serious point, which is and the centre of the point is whatever the tariffs may do, you can only sell in the UK products that meet our food standards in the UK, precisely the point that was being made by the Honourable Gentleman. And in order to make sure that that is true, people have to have a licence to be able to sell in the UK. And in addition, all Indian agriculture products are currently subject to intensified controls of 50% of consignment checks at the border. So this is one of the many issues where we need to make sure that we protect our producers in this country who are abiding by very high standards. I could apply this to all of the different agricultural foods that we're talking about, and aquaculture as well.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that reply, which I drew some comfort from, but we have to see the detail of the exact crustacean protections that end up. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is one glaring area that, even beyond the missing benefits to our important services industry, was a point of difference in the negotiations that we conducted and why we did not, when we were in government, consummate that deal, and those negotiations remained outstanding. And the Leader of the Opposition now has been very clear about this. When she was leading the negotiation, she refused to sign this deal as is because of the double contribution convention, and the Minister will know precisely what we mean. We still haven't seen the detail of that. I mean, the House here, and every member should be concerned that this is a very limited part of the process of scrutiny of trade deals. The rights of Parliament are perhaps not fully discharged just by the CRAG process. But we haven't even seen what the Minister referred to earlier as the HMRC agreement on this. What it means in substance, I'll choose my words very precisely, is that Indian workers who come here to work will not pay a penny in British national insurance contributions, and neither will their employers. So the government decided they would open this deal, this two-tier tax system for India, at precisely the same time as hiking their jobs tax on every single British worker. So by way of example, and I'm happy to be rebutted or corrected, by my calculations, under this agreement, it could be up to £10,000 a year cheaper to hire a software developer on an average British salary from India than someone in the same role from Britain, as employers will not be liable for those national insurance contributions. These are big numbers, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a big disadvantage to hire an identical British worker at a time that unemployment is rising. In fact, it's risen every month under this government, and there are 9 million people of working age not in work. Now, members...
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does this not suggest that actually when a deal was presented to the then Conservative Secretary of State, she declined to sign it because she judged it not in the British interest? It does rather suggest as if this government has just rolled over on this key point, which allows Indian firms to import Indian workers in preference to British ones. Yeah.
Well, I thank my honourable friend, who makes exactly the right point. The current Leader of the Opposition, the former Secretary of State, has been very clear that that was a deal breaker. That it wasn't, it was deal or no deal, and if that had been an absolute red line, then we wouldn't have signed this deal. So it's not a virtue to take any deal that is offered to you. As I say, this party is in favour of trade. We value our relationship with India, but we would not have crossed that red line. And as I said, yes, of course, I'm so sorry.
The Right Honourable Member for giving way. Would he agree with me that anybody who comes to our country, doesn't pay into the system, national insurance and our taxes, shouldn't be allowed to benefit from the people, the taxpayers, services like the NHS education and GPs, dentists, etc. And it is a two-tier system when we are treating our care workers, healthcare professionals that are coming here on official visas differently to imported labour.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear agreement across the House on the desire not to have a two-tier system. No, we all understand the need to pay our taxes to support our public services, but it won't feel right if two people sitting cheek by jowl, side by side, in the same place of employment, the same factory or work environment, are contributing at a very different rate to the exchequer, to those public services that we all support. Let me finish, and then there'll be plenty of opportunity, because I will understand. I'm not going to anticipate the member's point for him, but there are other agreements such as this in place. So I want to be full and clear about that. There are social security agreements where contributions are both paid in and taken out. We have those with the European Union, for example. They're a long-standing feature. They were under previous governments. We do also, again, to be very clear and open, we have limited number of agreements like this with some selected other countries, the high-skilled economies of Japan, South Korea and Chile, and to some degree Canada. But we don't have, Madam Deputy Speaker, an agreement like this of any sort with a mostly English-speaking nation of 1.5 billion people, all of whom would be better off potentially availing themselves of this arbitrage, this two-tier system under this deal. And astonishingly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this was left out of the UK government communications of this deal. So not only have we got a two-tier substance in terms of the economics of this deal, but we also had two-tier communications where the Indian government boasted about this as a significant, attractive feature of this deal, and of UK government communications, not a single mention. Now that of itself should send alarm bells ringing about this two-tier tax deal. I'll give way.
I wasn't going to make the point that he went on to make, that his government signed up to lots of these similar arrangements. I was going to make a different one, which is just to respond to the honourable gentleman's point, because I think it's important that we should make clear that under the Double Contributions Convention, a detached Indian worker and their employer in the UK would need to pay into the Indian Provident Fund, and on top of this will need to pay £3,105 in NHS surcharges, and up to £769 in visa fees, and on top of that their employer would pay an immigration skills charge of £3,000 and £525 to issue a certificate of sponsorship. So I think the numbers just don't add up in the kind of way that he was suggesting.
Could I just make the point that the Shadow Secretary of State has already spoken for longer than the Minister, which must in itself be something of a record. And I appreciate that there have been a lot of interventions on him from the front bench. So perhaps the Shadow Secretary of State can draw his remarks to a close, and the Minister has, of course, ample time in the wind-up. Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I shall take good heed of those comments. Look, I'll conclude. I mean, we support the advantages of a sovereign trade policy, and this is an excellent example of this, with one of the largest economies on the planet that is growing at approximately 5 times faster than the European Union. We do think this deal could have been better. We are passionate in supporting our investors, our lawyers, our engineers, our scientists, the wonderful services industry. We believe that they can compete anywhere in the world, provided the field is level and the rules are fair. But we don't need a good enough deal to get across the line. When British businesses needed something with a really good kick in it to get this country growing, instead of a vindaloo of a deal, the Prime Minister came back with a bag of soggy poppadoms.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, just to be absolutely clear in the beginning of my remarks in this important debate today, I do not oppose free trade deals which have immense benefits, as has been set out by the Minister. Although for once, or certainly on a very rare occasion, I do accept some of the points that have been made by the Shadow Minister in terms of missed opportunities. And I think one of the biggest missed opportunities, and the point I wish to focus my remarks on today, is at what point do we sacrifice our obligations to protection of human rights in favour of free trade? And that's what I will be focused on. The free trade agreement before us today raises many serious questions about our trade policy and human rights. But for many of my constituents in Bradford East, today's debate is not just about abstract trade policy or distant diplomatic calculations. It's about an issue very dear to their heart, Kashmir, which continues to be occupied. And I represent thousands of British Kashmiris with close family ties to Jammu and Kashmir. For them, the actions of the Indian state are not theoretical. They are lived realities felt through family separation, fear, arbitrary detention and the systematic erosion of basic freedoms. That is why the UK-India Free Trade Agreement raises such serious and urgent concerns. It is a major agreement, as pointed out by the Minister, with over 30 chapters. Yet it contains no explicit enforceable human rights clause. It goes much further than just tariffs. It is about standards, cooperation and the institutional machinery that will shape the relationship for years to come. And the central question for many of my constituents is, how can we seek to deepen economic cooperation with India while remaining silent on the grave and ongoing human rights violations in Kashmir and beyond? And let me be clear at the outset, economic engagement can never come at the expense of human rights, and it must never come at the expense of the Kashmiri people. For nearly 80 years, Kashmiris have endured persecution, repression and injustice, and in recent years the situation has dramatically worsened. Since the illegal revocation of Article 370 and 35A in 2019, Indian-occupied Kashmir has experienced prolonged restrictions on civil liberties, mass surveillance, arbitrary detention and repeated internet shutdowns. Political dissent has been criminalised, journalists silenced and human rights defenders targeted. These are not isolated incidents. They form part of a deliberate and sustained policy to strip Kashmiris of dignity, voice and agency. And I hear from the wider community I represent, whose family members have been detained without charge, whose communications are monitored and whose basic freedoms are denied. This is not an abstract foreign policy issue. It's a human rights crisis that reaches directly into our communities here in Britain. Madam Deputy Speaker, political prisoners remain behind bars without due process. Khurram Pervez, a globally respected human rights defender, has spent years imprisoned for documenting abuses. Yasin Malik has recently been convicted following proceedings widely condemned for lacking fairness and transparency. These cases symbolise a broader reality: the use of national security legislation to silence dissent, criminalise peaceful political activity and intimidate those who speak out. And yet, despite this context, the UK-India Free Trade Agreement contains no binding human rights safeguards, no accountability mechanisms and no credible system of monitoring. There is no dedicated human rights chapter and no monitoring body within the agreement structures required to monitor human rights tasks, human rights risks such as arbitrary detention and repression. The government presents this agreement as a landmark deal designed to deepen economic ties and open new markets. But trade agreements are not neutral instruments simply for economic gain. They reflect political choices and moral priorities. This agreement seeks to formalise and deepen economic cooperation with India while deliberately excluding enforceable human rights provisions. What kind of a message does that send? It sends a dangerous message that human rights violations can be overlooked in the pursuit of market access. It tells those responsible that there will be dialogue but no consequences. Engagement without conditions does not drive reform. it signals impunity. Independent organisations, including UN bodies and human rights NGOs, have documented widespread and systematic torture and ill treatment by Indian police and security forces, including custodial violence and abuse of pre-trial detention. Indeed, India signed the UN Convention Against Torture in 1997, yet by choice remains one of the few countries in the world never to have ratified it. The House will know that the torture is absolutely prohibited under international law. It is not culturally relative, it is not negotiable, and it cannot be ignored while negotiating preferential trade access. I also note that the agreement's labour commitments are explicitly excluded from the dispute settlement, which means they cannot be enforced in practice in the same way as the core economic chapters. If we are serious about modern partnership, then workers' rights and decent standards cannot be treated as optional add-ons. Warm words are welcome, but without clear routes to accountability, they offer little reassurance to those at risk of exploitation. And they leave a clear imbalance between what this agreement compels and what it merely encourages. Madam Deputy Speaker, with trade at around 43 billion and deep ties across our communities, Parliament's duty to get the safeguards right is even greater. It is troubling that there are no monitoring trigger, no safeguards, no accountability mechanisms that speak to Kashmir on minority protections. There are no graduated remedies for serious abuses short of tearing up the whole agreement, and no meaningful lever to respond when violations occur. Indeed, Parliament itself, whilst this comes before us today, what real influence does Parliament have in this place today, even today, in a statement like today, to amend this or to add safeguards to this or add human rights clauses to this? So, with the little influence we have over this today, let me ask the Minister some questions, and I hope he is a minister who normally is very good at answering giving direct answers, and I look forward to his direct answers to these questions. How can the government justify advancing a trade agreement of this scale whilst excluding binding human rights protections, particularly in light of the situation in Kashmir, which continues to worsen? What mechanisms will exist to monitor and respond to credible human rights violations linked directly to this agreement? What assurances can be given to British Kashmiri communities that their concerns are not being sidelined in the name of economic convenience? And finally, the Minister will be aware the Indian-occupied Kashmir remains disputed territory. What safeguards are in place in terms of any trade that will occur as a result of this agreement directly with an occupied territory as recognised under international law, because the agreement remains silent on that very important point? Madam Deputy Speaker, this agreement is not yet in force and Parliament still has a responsibility. We must insist that the trade policy strengthens justice rather than undermines it. We must refuse to send the message that human rights, especially the rights of an oppressed people, are negotiable. For the Kashmiri community I represent, I cannot stay silent and see injustice continuing. I cannot accept a trade agreement that deepens economic ties while turning its back on human dignity and justice. The world has ignored Kashmir for far too long. Britain must no longer be part of that silence. We have a moral, legal and historic duty, and it's about time we honoured it.
For the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Charlie Maynard. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I refer members to my register of interest and the business I founded in 1996, BDA Partners, in which I still hold a stake but have no role or responsibility. Economically, this agreement offers some benefits. As per the government's impact assessment, the UK's gross domestic product is estimated to increase by 0.13%, as the Minister has stated, as a result of this FTA. That's equivalent to £4.8 billion. That's in the long run. That's by 2040. So it's 0.13% by 2040. Let's put that into context. The hit to our economy from Brexit is around 6 to 8% of GDP, in the region of £210 billion. So an impact 44 times larger. That's now, compared to 15 years' time, we get 0.13%. I would be delighted.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. He quotes a Brexit hit of 6 to 8% of GDP. Has he just invented that figure, or has he got some evidence for it?
National Bureau of Economic Research, the United States.
I thought you don't like the States.
I certainly like the States. And while we are comparing with Europe, I note that the UK's free trade agreement means that 92% of UK exports to India will enter tariff-free under the agreement. Under the EU's deal, 96.6% of the EU's exports can enter tariff-free into India. Perhaps there is some logic, after all, to bigger trade blocs having more leverage. I wholeheartedly agree with the honourable gentleman's comments about national insurance contributions. I am also deeply concerned, as is my party, about that. And I take your point about visa fees and everything else, but by the time you add those all together, I think we still have the UK Inc., whether it's in my constituency of Witney or across the UK, at a major disadvantage, and I think this risks undermining British Labour. So, I really hope I am wrong. I don't think we are. And moving beyond the numbers, I want to highlight the concerns already mentioned by many members in this chamber about the agreement, the way it's been voiced by civil society groups about the way in which clauses in the agreement on labour, the environment and human rights are characterised by a pattern of aspirational language and a lack of enforceability, meaning they are not subject to the dispute settlement mechanism. So, cute words, but no teeth. So, the Liberal Democrats have long called for a set of minimum standards in order to benchmark future trade agreements, which would include human rights, conflict and oppression, environmental, labour and safety standards, where they can be negotiated based on UK trade and human rights policy and a trade and development policy. I now want to ask some questions to the Minister regarding India's role in busting the trade sanctions the UK has put on Russia. To recap, Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Both the UK and the EU banned direct imports of Russian oil and petroleum products in December 2022. However, a loophole stayed open which allowed derivative products, petrochemicals, imported from third countries into the UK to continue using Russian origin crude oil and gas. In July 2025, the EU amended its sanctions legislation to target imports of petrochemicals from third countries that used Russian origin oil. This has now taken effect in the EU, so the EU has blocked this loophole. In October 2025, the UK announced a further sanctions package targeting specific third country entities that supported Russian fossil fuels. That included India's Nayara Energy, which is part owned by Russia's state oil company Rosneft. On the 2nd of December 2025, the Trade Minister stated in front of the Business and Trade Select Committee, of which I'm a member, "We want India to do less business with Russia because we want Russia's war machine to be debilitated. There are lots of things I want to achieve in the world, but not all of them can be achieved through FTAs." So the Trade Minister and Trade team fully understood that India was and is selling Russia-originated petchems into the UK. We had leverage when we were negotiating the FTA, but instead the UK decided to cast a blind eye to India's sanction busting, helping Russia's war effort, and this continues still right now, with the UK importing jet fuel and other petrochemicals from India, which are manufactured with Russian oil and gas. The refining loophole is still there because Her Majesty's government hasn't yet legislated to ban imports of derivatives from Russian crude. The government has said it expects a ban to be in force in spring 2026, whenever that is. According to analysis by the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, between the ban on direct imports coming into force in 2022 and the end of 2025, the UK has imported £4 billion of jet fuel and other oil products made at refineries in India and Turkey, which run partially on Russian crude. And that every month the UK delays banning oil products made from Russian crude, it's effectively writing the Kremlin a cheque for around £44 million. And it gets worse. 4 of the 5 largest oil refiners in India are majority owned by the Indian government, with Reliance being the 5th. So it's not just that Indian refiners are helping Russia by selling us petchems. The state of India itself is right now selling jet fuel and other petrochemicals into the UK derived from Russian oil and gas. And what have we done about it? We've signed a free trade agreement with them. To add insult to injury, as far as I can tell, the loophole to be closed just covers oil derivatives, but petrochemicals are derived from natural gas too. So what's happening with these? So my 5 questions to the ministers, and then I will wrap, are the following. What is his justification for signing an FTA with a country which is helping Russia breach its sanctions? 2. Was this issue discussed in the FTA negotiations? 3. Does the planned ban cover petrochemicals imported from India and other third countries derived from either oil or gas? 4. Please can the Minister give a specific date for when this ban will come into force? Specific date. What steps are required to effect this, and what is the timeline for each of those steps? And finally, what are the reasons for delay in implementing this ban? Why hasn't the government already closed this loophole? Thank you.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I welcome the UK-India Free Trade Agreement. It is truly historic and a groundbreaking deal for the UK, Scotland and my West Dunbartonshire constituency. And as the Minister stated in his opening remarks, India is the fastest growing country in the G20 and set to become the 3rd largest economy in the world by 2028. For this reason, it is crucial to secure a strong and mutual relationship with India. In the current geopolitical climate of uncertainty and instability, these relationships are more important than ever. This government has delivered a favourable deal that brings hope and investment for the future. Through this deal, we are making significant progress towards achieving our growth mission. For West Dunbartonshire, the impact of this new deal will be immediate and tangible. This trade deal will result in much-needed investment for West Dunbartonshire and its residents. The Scotch whisky industry supports thousands of jobs in my constituency, and this trade deal will hopefully result in many more. These businesses provide skilled, well-paid jobs and anchor our local economy. It is vital industry to my constituency for workers, local economies and tourism, and one that we are very proud of. My constituency is home to Chivas Brothers, Auchentoshan Distillery, Loch Lomond Group and a number of smaller distilleries. The Chivas Kilmalid bottling site in Dumbarton employs more than 1,100 people on permanent contracts alone, and we are proud to be home to their state-of-the-art bottling site. Their recent multi-million-pound investment programme continues at pace, and this deal gives the industry that added confidence to invest, and in doing so gives the workforce added confidence and security in their future. Scotch whisky distilleries are amongst the most visited tourist attractions in Scotland, drawing domestic and international visitors who support our hospitality sector. Long-term export growth will, of course, strengthen this. Scotch whisky has faced sky-high import tariffs for decades, as high as 150%, and under this new agreement, these costly tariffs will be cut in half and further reduced to 40% within 10 years. Furthermore, the deal is expected to increase spirit exports to India by 180%. This is a massive win for Scotland, the whisky industry and for West Dunbartonshire. Increased bilateral trade, increased wages and GDP growth is set to grow the Scottish economy by £190 million a year, and the Scotch Whisky Association has described the tariff cuts as transformational, with potential to increase exports by around £1 billion over the next 5 years. This deal is a clear statement of intent that the UK is open to trade, serious about growth and prepared to engage constructively with the world. However, these deeper relationships bring deeper responsibilities. I am encouraged by growth in relations between India and Britain, which is why I hope it can open up meaningful dialogue about diplomatic issues. As most of the House will be aware, my West Dunbartonshire constituent Jagtar Singh Johal has been arbitrarily detained in India since 2017. It's been over 8 years now, 3,020 days. In 2022, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that his imprisonment was arbitrary and called for his immediate release. Last year, he was acquitted of all charges with respect to the only case against which has proceeded to trial. Despite this, he continues to be detained on 8 other cases, all similar charges with the same witnesses and the same discredited evidence. We must do more as a government than simply raise his case with Indian counterparts. It's often remarked that we must respect the Indian judicial system. However, any legal system which remands an individual, a UK citizen, for over 8 years is not worth our respect. Worryingly, he's recently been transferred to Tahir Jail in New Delhi, which is infamous for its overcrowding and its violence. I hope his case can be resolved following this closer and friendlier relationship with India, and therefore his release can be advanced. I can advise the House that today is Jagtar's birthday. He will be 39 today. This will be his 9th birthday detained in an Indian prison. His family in West Dunbartonshire are deeply concerned about his well-being. They have shown extraordinary resilience and dignity over many years, and they continue to hope for progress. This agreement marks a new phase in our UK-India relationship. It establishes regular channels of engagement and strengthens trust between our two governments, and I truly hope that this renewed partnership can support continued constructive discussions about Jagtar's case with the aim of securing his release and return to his family in Dumbarton. I urge the Government to continue raising this matter consistently and carefully with the Indian authorities, and to ensure that Jagtar and his family know that he remains a priority to us. On behalf of West Dunbartonshire, I warmly welcome this comprehensive economic and trade agreement. It is a deal that will deliver real economic benefit by supporting jobs, driving investment and strengthening our whisky industry. It means opportunity for workers, for business, for tourism and for future generations. It marks a major milestone in our relationship with India, one that is future-focused and built on renewed trust. It is testament to this Government's promise to deliver, and it positions our United Kingdom to grow and compete in a rapidly changing world. This deal invests in our future and will have a real meaningful impact in my constituency, and I fully support it, and I look forward to seeing it deliver for West Dunbartonshire and for the United Kingdom as a whole. But I also hope that this closer relationship can help bring resolution to the deeply troubling case of my constituent Jagtar Singh Johal and deliver the outcome that he and his family deserve. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Indian government is highly unusual in its approach to trade agreements. Unlike most other countries, India has a long-standing policy of using trade deals to try to secure favourable treatment in the immigration system. This deal, unfortunately, is no different. Under the terms of this agreement, Indian companies will be able to transfer their workers to this country far more easily. And once they're here, those workers will be able to avoid national insurance for up to 3 years, needing only to pay into the Indian social security system, payments which are, unsurprisingly, much lower than here in the UK. This national insurance holiday will make it much cheaper to hire Indian workers, especially in fields like IT and engineering, than to hire domestic talent. Imagine a British IT firm set to hire a computer programmer for £60,000 a year. To hire them, an employer must pay £8,250 in national insurance on top of that salary. That totals £68,250. Their Indian competitor, to hire somebody on the same salary, would only need to pay about £1,470 to the Indian Employee Provident Fund, mandatory contributions to which are capped at 15,000 rupees a month, or about £120. That totals £61,470. So under the government's deal, it would be at least 10% cheaper to hire an Indian worker over a British one. This is absurd. With pleasure.
My honourable friend for giving way. Does she also agree with me that the employees of Indian companies who are sent here to work for 3 years and then maybe stay on, they normally would be not paid the British salary level, and they would be happy to accept a lower salary. So as well as saving on national insurance, these companies will be saving a lot more money by underpaying their employees.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for his intervention. It's a very important point because, as I'm about to talk about, we have double contribution conventions with other companies, but with other countries, but not with other countries with economies like India's, where there are so many people, well north of 1 billion people, who would be happy to do these jobs for much lower salaries than our workers at home would expect. So, as I say, it is true that we have double contribution conventions with other countries. These aim to simplify intra-company transfers for international businesses. However, these agreements are usually struck with countries that have compatible economies, similar education outcomes and comparable social security systems, like Japan or Canada. India stands alone as by far the largest and least wealthy country on the list. In exchange for a deal with India, this government has chosen to sell out skilled British workers who've worked hard to get where they are by allowing Indian firms to undercut them. We will see highly skilled British workers in cutting-edge fields like engineering priced out by Indian workers. Given the relative markets and educational systems in the UK and India, we should not expect this always to be a like-for-like swap in terms of talent. This is a model that we've already seen take hold in the United States. There, Indian consultancy firms lease their workers to American companies who are then able to pay an Indian worker far less than they would need to pay an American. The result has been a massive expansion in the number of lower-cost Indian workers at the expense of American workers. Most other countries are perfectly happy to strike trade deals without forcing us to undercut our own workforce. This government should have expected India to do the same.
Yeah.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to have a chance to speak in this debate and to use the moment to say a huge thank you to my colleagues on the Select Committee for helping inform this debate with a report that was agreed cross-party and which provided, if anything, a reasonably warm welcome for the government's work in securing this free trade agreement, but with a number of caveats which I will touch on. Before I set out the committee's evaluation of this agreement, however, I do think it is worth us just in a way marking the moment. And if anything, the Minister, who is not necessarily someone who is known for underselling a moment in the House, could have actually sold this moment rather more, because we don't quite know when he will get the Gulf cooperation deal over the line. No doubt that is imminent. We don't quite know when he will get the Swiss deal over the line. Presumably that's not too far off now. But it could well be that this is the year in which he crowns a number of free trade agreements signed since we left the European Union, which do, in effect, create a triple ocean system of alliances that basically bring free trade agreements between the UK to about 46 countries in all, home to 2.5 billion people, and blessed with something like 60% of world output. That is actually quite an achievement. Now, those on these benches who are the pro-Europeans amongst us will, of course, say that we can now look at what the prize of free trade agreements has brought compared to the losses that have entailed since we left the European Union. About 14 billion of uplift in GDP is forecast as a result of the free trade agreements that we have signed. That is much less than the perhaps £140 billion hit to the GDP that we have lost since leaving the European Union. But I am not going to provoke you, Madam Deputy Speaker, by dwelling on that point for too long. Nonetheless, the India Free Trade Agreement that we debate tonight is the keystone in that new architecture. It does connect us to one of the world's fastest growing economies, and it does anchor us in the Indo-Pacific for decades to come. I think it is also worth saying that this is a significant moment for India, because this is not the only deal that India has signed, as the Minister said. There is also the EU deal that has been signed by India, and there is also, it would appear, a deal with the United States too. And so India is on the cusp of the biggest transformation in its trade policy since independence. It's a country that has long been defined by its protectionism, but it is now choosing to use its trade agreements as the anchors for very ambitious domestic reform. And if these agreements hold, as I hope that they will, with the exception of agriculture, India is now moving from selective liberalisation to something approximating a near-open economy. That is a very significant moment in India's long history, home as it is to about a sixth of humanity. These are not the traditional kind of Swiss cheese deals with lots and lots of carve-outs, delays and exemptions. India is now set to almost fully liberalise its manufacturing sector within 7 to 10 years. That is a step change by any historical standard. And for the first time, India has agreed deals that will be policed by powerful external partners, not just the Minister on the front bench, a powerful interlocutor in any trade negotiation, but also by the combined might of the European Commission. Now, for a government in India that has been protectionist by conviction for a long time, this does represent an important reversal of deep nationalist instincts. And as one of the world's great homes of free trade, that is something which our nation should celebrate. And I hope that this newfound philosophy that we see from Delhi is something that the Minister can help use in the conversations that he's got to have in the World Trade Organization and elsewhere over the course of this year. Because, let's face it, we all now need more allies for free trade in this world. And if we are to build what the Finnish call the values-based multilateralism that is probably the best safeguard for peace in this world, then India's role in promoting free trade could be an important component. This agreement also, this new posture also, does have, I think, an important dimension when it comes to China, because if India is indeed going to grow a low-cost manufacturing sector, then the world will need to depend on China much less. So, all in all, it is very important that the UK has played its role in securing this agreement. Now, the committee's report confirms that the agreement secures substantial tariff liberalisation in what is a highly protected market. As the Minister has said, Indian tariffs are reduced or eliminated by our reckoning on 92% of UK exports by value, with around 64% of tariff lines liberalised on day one. Now, the government modelling, such that it is, always a bit speculative, always some interesting assumptions, always a bit long-term, always a bit difficult to pressure test, but nonetheless, the government modelling suggests that the deal adds nearly £5 billion a year to UK GDP by 2040 and raises UK-India trade by £25.5 billion. Those were the numbers that the Minister rehearsed in his opening speech tonight. Our analysis, however, I think presents numbers which are a little bit more meaningful for UK business, because the £400 million worth of tariff savings in year one is real revenue for UK businesses. This is something that will flatter the bottom line, and for businesses which are under pressure, for reasons we will set out in a report on Wednesday, this could provide much important cash flow. Those tariff savings could rise to about £3.2 billion over 10 years as export volumes improve. Now, there are clear sector gains. There are particular sectors that account for much of those gains in the future. Automotive is something where we think there could be a significant prize, although we do think that there are implementation challenges, and we do think that there is some clarity that is required on how the quotas will actually work in practice. As the Minister said, and as we heard from other honourable members, spirits exporters are due to do extremely well from this new bargain. They're going to see tariff reductions from extremely high rates which exist today. And as the Minister belaboured, for the first time, UK firms are going to secure access to India's central government procurement market. Now, that is a very large number. Whether it will be true that our firms can genuinely compete for those new contracts is something that the committee plans to study very carefully. Now, when the deal was signed and first published, there was a lot of noise in the media about migration and mobility, and that was something that the committee took a lot of evidence on. Actually, we concluded that this agreement is not, in fact, a big migration deal, nor does it materially change overall migration policy. What it does, as I think the opposition spokesperson pointed out well, is it does provide limited facilitation of mobility for skilled professionals linked to trade and services delivery. It could go much further in the future, but given where the Home Office positions itself on this policy at the moment, we accept that there won't be much progress in the near term. There are other real advances, and they do reflect years of negotiation, and they shouldn't be dismissed. But the committee did want to underline that there are very, very significant risks attached with this agreement. India is not a frictionless market. Tariffs were never the only barrier. The regulatory system in India is complex, it's decentralised, and it's highly discretionary. Much of the barriers, whether it's licensing requirements, certification, documentation, are at the state level. And that state-level variation and state-level stubbornness in bringing those barriers down is something that is going to require an awful lot of work from His Majesty's government in India. And that is why the successes of this agreement depend less on what is written in the treaty text and far more on whether firms can actually operationalise it in day-to-day, week-to-week business. And I'm glad that the Minister sought to take this bull by the horns in his opening remarks, because we are being asked to debate a treaty tonight at a time when the Department for Business and Trade is seeking 40% reductions in export support staff. The Minister went out of his way, I will in a moment, the Minister went out of his way to stress that those headcount reductions would not be in India. I think that was the guarantee that he gave to the House tonight. That's important because these are the officials who are responsible for helping firms navigate the rules of origin, quota management, regulatory blockages and enforcement failures. They're also going to be required to staff an awful lot of working groups that the Minister and his counterpart are going to have to oversee. But I worry that the reduction in export support staff here in the United Kingdom is going to deny firms here in Britain the knowledge and the connections that they might need to really exploit the full possibilities of this new agreement. But I give way to the honourable gentleman.
The honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that unlike the UK, we are well regulated, we have auditing, we have verification, and there is a level of trust in the system for products, services, food, pharmaceuticals, agriculture. It's not at the same level. I'm a big fan of India. My heritage is from India. My family's from India, so I'm not here to criticise India unnecessarily. But the culture of compliance is not as embedded as it is in Europe and in the UK. So we would need more audits and inspections externally to confirm that the products coming to our shores did meet our standards. And for that, the government needs to invest more in resources, not reduce the team sizes.
Well, I think the honourable member is exactly right. What we lamented when we published our report is that there wasn't a full-scale, full-blown implementation plan that went alongside this plan. Now, to a degree, those are difficult things to write because who can forecast how quickly this treaty will go through the ratification process that is needed in India, for example. But we heard evidence that some markets, not least in automotives, had been chilled because, of course, if people know that there are huge tariff savings on the way, if people know that there are huge price savings on the way, then why would they not delay their purchase rather than make the purchase today? So we think that there could have been some wisdom in at least attempting an implementation plan, not least a resource plan that goes alongside this treaty, even perhaps something that could have been tabled for tonight's debate to show and to reassure the House that the government is going to be watching the implementation of this deal like a hawk. And it is for that reason that the Select Committee has decided to go to India a bit later on in March to really understand how this deal is going to get implemented in real life. Because the risk is that if our export support work is hollowed out, the consequences will be predictable. Smaller exporters in particular will walk away, utilisation rates for the treaty will remain low, and the headline gains will fail to reach the wider economy and benefit the constituents who sent us to this House to debate this treaty tonight. So I do hope that as quickly as he can, the Minister will rustle up an implementation plan to tell us how this agreement is actually going to be implemented in practice, and I very much hope that he will be able to align the ambitions for this treaty with the level of resource that he and his department are investing in it. The House will want to know that the committee also tested this treaty against the deals that have now been secured by our allies in the European Union and in the United States. Compared with the EU-India deal, it does seem that the UK has moved faster and secured earlier liberalisation on some tariff lines. We've liberalised 92% of the value of our exports. The EU has secured 96.6% of its exports, but both were for roughly the same level of market access to India, offers covering over 99% of India's exports by value to both the UK and the EU's markets. Now, the EU deal obviously covers a much wider volume of trade than we deliver with India. They are therefore going to enjoy much bigger total tariff savings and a much bigger quota access, in particular for sectors like automotive. But the opposition spokesman, the member for Arundel and South Downs, was right to flag that there was limited progress on services. That was something that we flagged too. It is the lifeblood of the British economy. It's the lifeblood of our exports. We are a services superpower. The EU's negotiating position does appear at first blush to be broader and deeper, although the final outcomes, I would say, at this stage do remain unclear until the final text is published. Compared with the United States, the contrast is different again. It would appear that the White House has prioritised strategic leverage and tariff pressure over comprehensive liberalisation, extracting concessions through market power, not traditional FTA approaches. The UK has chosen a different path. It's rules-based, it's negotiated commitments, and it's long-term engagement. I think that this is a choice that can work for us as long as we are ruthless about ensuring good implementation. We are sceptical about the level of services mobility that has been delivered. We are sceptical about the absence of a bilateral investment treaty. We do think that that is a significant gap in our long-term framework, and we recognise that policy volatility and regulatory risk do still matter. In particular, India's record on investor protection does remain uneven, and its tax administration is still too often used in a way that is, frankly, weaponised. So making sure that we have good ways to monitor this and to escalate this will be important if this deal is to be a success. As the Honourable Member for Stoke Central flagged, there are some UK sectors like textiles and ceramics where there will be increased competitive pressure. And while the agreement does contain binding human rights provisions, the responsibilities of UK firms don't end at the border. And so being strong on human rights protection, upgrading the dysfunctional Trade Remedy Authority and pressurising the Competition and Market Authority to actually publish a foreign subsidy control regime would all be extremely welcome. The final point, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I wanted to flag, though, is something that came up during the Minister's appearance in front of the committee, where I haven't yet heard enough tonight or since he came to the committee about progress. The reality is India remains one of the biggest customers of Russian oil. That is money that is fuelling Putin's war machine, and certainly as recently ago as January, His Majesty's government had not introduced controls that were in place in the European Union to ensure that oil derivatives made from Russian oil were banned from this country. Indeed, when Politico reported on this earlier in the year, they noted that something like 1 in 6 units of Britain's aviation fuel imports were derived from Russian oil. That is not something that I know the Minister will want to tolerate for very long. He, for a long time, has been one of the leading voices in this House standing up to Putin and the evil of Russia. And so I hope in the wind-ups he will be able to say more about exactly what he is doing, along with his colleagues, to ensure that we are now stopping the possibilities of importing Russian oil derivatives from India. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, our overall take on this was that this was a good deal in the UK national interest. There is just one final note of dissent that I wanted to supply. When the CRAG legislation was introduced to the House in 2010, it was always the intention of Parliament that when free trade deals came for debate, they would be debated on a votable motion. That would allow Parliament to actually exercise the licence that it was promised to delay ratification if it was discontent with the terms of an agreement that have been tabled before us. I am grateful both to the Leader of the House and to the Minister for ensuring that there is a general debate available for us tonight, but it is not a debate on a votable motion. If this Parliament is to be a strong watchdog and a strong guardian of the executive, then it is important that what were once prerogative powers are powers that are transferred to us here in this House. And so I hope that this is the last debate on a free trade agreement that we have on a general motion, because in a democracy we decide things by voting.
Stephen Gethins.
Thank you.
Madam Deputy Chair. Can I, first of all, thank the officials who have been working with the Minister on this particular trade deal. I'm sure the Minister won't mind me doing so. These trade deals are difficult and they take a while to come to fruition. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the reduction on whisky. But as the member for Murray East quite rightly highlighted, that has to be matched in terms of domestic policy towards the whisky industry as well. But that being said, I know that distilleries such as Arbroath in my own constituency who trade globally will be absolutely delighted with this. I will put on the record, though, it would be quite helpful, we've heard some of that from the opposition front bench about food and drink and some of the safeguards that have been put in place. And I know the Minister has mentioned that, and I would hope he'll mention a little bit more of that later on. In fact, this is exactly the kind of deal that we were told that only Brexit Britain could deliver. That if only the UK left the European Union, we'd be able to deliver all of these kinds of deals. Except the EU's gone and done exactly the same. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that all that stuff about Brexit Britain was absolutely nonsense, that the EU has been able to do exactly the same. And you know, it would be remiss of me not to give way to the honourable gentleman.
What the honourable member hasn't mentioned to the House is that it took the EU 20 years to get a deal with India. It took the United Kingdom 3.
Well, the honourable member speaks and he says that I've not mentioned it. I had just spoken and I had started and I did want to keep him in. The member who, of course, represents a part of the United Kingdom, which we've all been told gets the best of both worlds, being in the single market and the customs union. Imagine the best of both worlds, as has been told by Conservative and Labour members as well. But on that point, will he tell us why the EU has been able to remove more tariffs on its EU goods? There's also, and I wonder if the Minister will talk about this, a stronger commitment on climate sustainability as well as trading within that, and there are elements on it in terms of dealing with climate change inside of that. And of course on bilateral income, the percentage, because we know that the EU is a bigger market, it would be bigger, the percentage is higher in terms of the EU savings within that. Now I know that the Minister used to be a European enthusiast. I know that since he's gone into government it has dissipated somewhat, but I hope that I'll give way one last time to the member.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that being inside the EU would have given us much more bargaining power? And the reason why the EU's got a better deal with India is that they are collective bargaining with so many countries, and now we are a lone wolf, little island, and countries agreeing trade deals with us know that they've got us over a barrel.
Well, he's right. The UK as a second-tier power has left itself poorer, as the Minister has acknowledged to his credit, and the Liberal Democrat Speaker acknowledged that as well. It's just a pity that the Liberal Democrats don't agree with me and the honourable member that we should rejoin. It would seem now. No, look, I did say it was going to be my last, but since it's the Minister, I really ought to.
Collective bargaining. Surely he's in favour of Scotland doing its collective bargaining within the United Kingdom.
But if only we were listened to. You know, we feel about as listened to as the leader of the Scottish Labour Party at the moment, and that's not terribly well listened to. You know, I'm a great believer in a 21st century model of union based on the treaties, the one that listens to its different member states, makes its members richer, gives them more rights, rather than a pretty out-of-date and outmoded 18th century version of the Union. So I'm glad that the Minister has given me that opportunity. Now, earlier on, the member for Birmingham Hodge Hill quite rightly talked about services and some of these others. Now, the EU has negotiated higher levels of freedom of movement. Now, on services, and it would be remiss of me again not to talk about the higher education sector, and I wonder if the Minister can talk about this in his summing up. He will be aware of the huge impact that trade with India has in our higher education sector. In Dundee, for example, and I'm going to talk about student recruitment, there was a huge amount of recruitment from India, more than the entire European Union, certainly post-Brexit, when that, of course, fell off and we were left more isolated. There were 810 Indian students in 22-23, 365 in 24-25, which led to that university's significant financial crisis. And it's not alone in the higher education sector for that. The former Principal Shane O'Neill talked about the negative impact of UK policy. And the University of Scotland have talked about the loss of dependence and the toxic rhetoric around migration in the UK having a detrimental impact on the higher education sector. Can I also say, and I'll refer to my register of interest as somebody who still does a little bit of teaching at the University of St Andrews, I have to say the value that we get from having more international universities, not just in terms of income, but in the richness of the teaching regime, in terms of giving our students access to students from throughout the world, but also in terms of research as well, is exceptionally important. And I wonder if we'll touch on that point. It's had a hugely, UK policy has had a hugely detrimental impact on my constituency, and in particular the financial challenges that the University of Dundee faces. And I'm sorry to say, and I truly am sorry to say, when we saw a continuation of that toxic legacy around the Conservatives' migration policy being continued into government by the Labour Party. Now, finally, just on some of these issues, the member for Birmingham Hodge Hill talked about some of the scrutiny. Now, if we were members of the European Parliament, we get full access to these trade agreements. Will he look at the way the European Parliament deals with this, not just in terms of voting rights, but also in terms of the scrutiny and things being published as a way of good practice that the UK Parliament could pursue? I also, and I'm glad that the member for West Dunbartonshire hasn't taken up the offer of being across the road at number 10, but is here. Can I say to him, I'm so pleased that he brought up the case of Jagtar Singh Johal. He's made a great case for his constituent, and if he doesn't mind me saying, continuing from the good work as well that Martin Docherty-Hughes, of course, continued. I think we'll all want to wish Mr Johal a happy birthday, but we all sincerely hope that it's a happier birthday at this time next year. And I thank him for the work and for raising that, and I'll add my voice to that for the Minister to respond to. And finally, a number of members have raised this, but the question of Russian oil in terms of this, what's happening in terms of Russian oil and what conversations were had with Indian officials, and are there any refineries that could be targeted as part of a broader sanctions process? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by saying that we all, of course, want a trade deal, a symbiotic relationship where not just our country succeeds, but any other country that we trade with also succeeds. But that must not, cannot be a compromise where we undermine the core values, the core British values of upholding law, ethical and moral values. And yet when it comes to this agreement, that's exactly what we've done. Our commitment to human rights, climate and justice have been sidelined for what is obviously a commercial gain. And it is this kind of moral weakness that has become a defining feature of pretty much everything this government has done on the world stage, discarding human rights at the first sign of pushback and branding cowardice for pragmatism. Time and time again, we've seen the same story. When the Prime Minister went to China, we all know that the Uyghurs facing forced assimilation, abuse and genocide in Xinjiang were the last item on his agenda, if not left out entirely. And with British Jimmy Lai having been sentenced to 20 years in jail today for defending democracy in Hong Kong, it's clear that any attempts to move the dial on that front have failed miserably. Without doubt, the same can be said of Sir Keir Starmer's trip to India. He promised to raise the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, and many honourable members have raised this, a British Sikh who has been imprisoned for 8 years without conviction, all because he stood up for the most basic human rights for Sikhs in India. The same can be said for environmental and labour standards, which have been neglected too. The government refused to even complete an independent human rights risk assessment, which would have highlighted the violations British money was at risk of perpetuating. That refusal speaks volumes. But nowhere is this government's moral abdication more glaring than in its silence on Kashmir.
Hear, hear.
A region born out of a catastrophic failure of partition in 1947, Kashmir has endured decades of broken promises and betrayed commitments. Yet the Prime Minister did not even pretend to raise its plight with the Prime Minister, Modi. For a people long accustomed to British indifference, this was simply the latest insult. It's a region that is not only occupied partly by India, but had its constitutional autonomy removed in 2019. For decades, the people of Kashmir have seen their most fundamental rights trampled upon. We have military occupation, political repression, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings, restrictions of freedom of speech and assembly. The suffering endured by Kashmiri people at the hands of India is nothing short of horrifying. And yet it is in this context of systemic and unashamed oppression that Kashmiri people's fight for self-determination continues to be ignored, overlooked by nations that are more interested in kowtowing to an occupying power for economic gain. For more than 75 years, successive British governments have washed their hands of a crisis they helped create, hiding behind the fiction that it's merely a matter for India and Pakistan. Even now, while we have presidency of the United Nations Security Council, we are silenced by our political objectives, paralysed when it comes to addressing injustice around the world. This government is always talking about its non-tolerance of affronts to justice. But when the time comes to act on those promises, it falters. And it's not just about priorities. It is a sign of the discrimination that this government is willing to tolerate on our own shoulders when it suits their interests. It speaks to the responsibilities it is willing to flout when sorting out mess that our empire left behind. Wherever there's human rights violations, we cannot neglect our moral and legal obligations abroad for quick wins at home. Just as there should be with any trade deal struck by this nation, the free trade agreement should have included a clause that made the benefits of trade conditional upon the protection of human rights, the release of political prisoners, the enforcement of labour standards and the liberation of the oppressed. And I hear the Minister make mention of the fact that we have a clause but that it is not enforceable. And unfortunately, that might as well not have been included within the documentation because it has no bite. And because if there are no meaningful sanctions to deter nations from committing such atrocities, how can we expect them to change? And I would gently request that the government reflects on how committed it truly is to upholding international law and on its willingness to have tough conversations with our allies in a world, I'm afraid to say, we are seeing losing international law and values aligned to it. Britain must be a binding force that holds it together no matter what. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I do echo what my honourable member for Bradford East has said and has repeatedly said in this chamber. We must uphold the moral, legal obligations. Wherever there's injustice, we must be the force that stands up to it. Thank you.
Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It would be remiss not to touch on the fact that the roots of this trade deal stretch back to the previous Conservative government, and to mention that the then Secretary of State Allister Jack, now Lord Jack of Courants in the other place, sent an aircraft carrier stuffed with dancers and pipers from the Edinburgh military tattoo to India to highlight the unfairness of the regime that whisky faced out there and which this deal does so much to address. I have the pleasure of sitting on the Business and Trade Committee chaired adroitly by the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham, Hodge and Solihull North. And one of the things that worries me on that committee when we talk about these trade deals, and he's touched on it himself here, is the government figures for these deals. We've heard time and again that the expected lift in GDP from this deal is around 4.8 billion, 0.13 of the UK's GDP. These figures seem incredibly low. And that may be a lack of ambition, I hope not. It may also be caution. Perfectly good that the government should do that. But I do think that it's incredible that we are expecting so little from these deals, and I think we could raise those figures. That must not be a ceiling, that must be a floor figure. We could do much better, I think. And the difficulty we've got is, and again, this has been touched on, the Department of Business and Trade is cutting its headcount now. The bloated state has to be reduced, of course it does. But we have to apply those cuts judiciously. And I think good that the in-house team, the in-country team in India are staying put, but the teams in the UK that will help businesses here export, if they go, then we have a problem and we kill growth. Again, I must touch on the CPTPP, easy for me to say, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. Again, we are expecting very modest gains from that, and yet it offers us a tremendous market, an absolutely huge market, at a time when the EU's share of GDP is drifting away. The honourable member from the Liberal benches is very keen on returning us to a customs union, In fact, that customs union would commit us to applying EU-set tariffs. That would take away the freedoms that we have got from Brexit to strike out and do our own deals. Potentially, the EU is looking at CPTPP. We are already in. We have first mover advantage, and we should strike out with the confidence that Brexit gives us as a trading nation. This country, Adam Smith literally wrote the book on free trade. We are a trading nation. That's what built this country. We should get back to that confidence. I must also touch on the question of agriculture. The Business and Trade Committee heard evidence, both written and oral, from Tom Bradshaw, the NFU president, and he was concerned that while lamb exports could do well in this deal, dairying is once again left quite wide open to some difficulties. And that's a particular issue for me in my constituency, Dumfries and Galloway. We have some of the most productive grassland in the UK. We make fabulous Galloway cheddar. I would love to see more of that being exported to India. It's probably the case that not much paneer comes from India to this country at the moment, but that will change. India is moving at incredible pace. It's hard to believe that in 5 or even 10 years' time, the Indian dairy industry will not have moved on, and the licences that the Minister talked about will be in place, and there will be a flow this way from dairying. And that is a concern for that particular sector, one that is very, very sensitive. And the other thing that worries me on the Business and Trade Committee is the EU reset, the much-vaunted EU reset which the government is currently seeking. Part of that is a sanitary and phytosanitary deal which will affect agriculture in the round. What impact, can the Minister tell us, might this have on future trade deals? Because these trade deals at the moment are struck with the UK based on UK rules and regulations. If we accept dynamic alignment with Europe, we are no longer rule makers in this area, we are rule takers. Will those countries with whom we are striking deals have to look to the EU then? Where does that leave us? Does it not hamstring us at a time when, again, as I say, we have this fantastic opportunity to strike our own deals and hopefully drive growth? Thank you.
Jim McAllister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister, of course, was one of the most ardent Remainers that this House produced. So I'm sure the irony is not lost on him today that he comes to this House to propose a trade deal which wouldn't have been possible if he'd had his way, because it is only because of Brexit that it is possible for the United Kingdom to reach trade deals across the world. And of course,
EU just signed one.
Sorry, yes, I will deal with the fact that the EU just signed one, but as I indicated in an earlier intervention, I well remember when I was a member of the European Parliament, at the time when Peter Mandelson was the Trade Minister, trumpeting the fact that they were now going to negotiate a trade deal with India. That was in 2007. It took them to 2026 to manage to cobble together a trade deal. Such is the pace of how the EU proceeds. The United Kingdom, on its post-Brexit era, has been able to reach this deal from 2022. So I think the parallel does not stack up for those who are EU fantasists. Yes?
Remember, tell me, if Brexit's been so great, why on earth nobody else has followed the UK out of the door?
Well, I well suspect that one of the reasons is because the EU made it a punishment beating of the United Kingdom in respect of Northern Ireland, so that any other country daring to assert their sovereignty would be frightened out of it. And I will return to the impact of this deal on Northern Ireland in a minute. But it is good to see the tariffs fall. It's good to see that UK products across the board will generally fall from 15% on tariffs to 3% going into India. That is good. I have a question for the Minister on that, though. It seems from what I read in this deal that there will be, once the deal is confirmed, that there will be an immediate uninhibited flow of Indian goods that come onto the deal into the United Kingdom, but the reciprocal movement of goods seems to be on a progressive basis rather than an immediate basis. And perhaps the Minister would explain to the House why that is, why the Indians get immediate access and we get truncated and delayed access. I think we would all be interested to hear that. I note that part of the deal, of course, does reduced the horrendous tariffs on whisky, but still to a very high level, still to 75%. And as a constituent member with Bushmills in my constituency, of course, that reflects on the good jobs that are provided there and provokes my interest in that. Ultimately, we are told over a 10-year period, the tariff might ultimately reduce to 40%. It's still a whopping tariff. Yes, it's much better than 150%, but it still is a huge tariff. Another point I want some clarification from the Minister on relates to vehicles. There is a portion of this deal which deals with access, though it's capped, for United Kingdom vehicles into the Indian market. Can I ask explicitly, does that include buses, or is it just motor vehicles? Is it just cars? It's very important it includes buses, because in my constituency, of course, we have Wrightbus producing quality buses, and in Falkirk and elsewhere, we have buses produced in Scotland. So it's important that the access is across the vehicular market and includes buses, and that it is not unreasonably capped. And perhaps the Minister could explain the wherewithal and the why of that particular cap in answering that point. Now I come to the absurdity of the implementation of this deal. And I come now to the Windsor Framework and the protocol which afflicts Northern Ireland. Because under that Windsor Framework, we are left in Northern Ireland under the EU's customs union.
Lucky you.
And that means that any imports from India come to Northern Ireland subject not to the tariffs set forth in this deal, but subject to EU tariffs. Yes, our exports, such as Bushmills whisky, go out under this deal, but imports are blocked under this deal in terms of meeting whatever the tariff might be for the rest of the United Kingdom. We are subject to the EU tariffs. And of course that is a common feature across all the deals that have been done and will be done. And it is rooted in... Yes?
Maybe he can enlighten me. For my information, the reason that something had to be introduced like that was to keep the free flow, friction-free border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and wouldn't the conditions to remove the Windsor Framework impose a hard border between the two nations?
No, it most certainly would not. In modern times, there is an abundance of opportunity to develop a scheme with the assistance of modern technology to have mutual enforcement on the fundamental of international trade. If a company in my constituency wants, I'll stick with buses, wants to sell buses to Germany, they must make them to the standards of the German customer. If a German company wants to sell buses into the United Kingdom, they must make them to the standards of the United Kingdom. So that is the fundamental starting point for trade. You create a circumstance where each country mutually enforces the standards of the other, and thereby you protect the market of the other. And to underwrite it, you introduce a criminal sanction that if any company in the United Kingdom breaches those rules, then there's criminal liability, and you look for reciprocal arrangements. That's the essence of mutual enforcement. That would work, but instead we have sacrificed the sovereignty over part of our own country to a foreign jurisdiction, namely the EU, and said to them, we will subject all our economy to your rules, which we don't make and we can't change. And we do it utterly unnecessary. And the real bite of unfairness in that is that multiple companies in Northern Ireland which do not trade outside the United Kingdom, many don't even trade outside Northern Ireland, but they are caught by the same rules as if they did. They must make their goods, produce their goods, market them in the way dictated by the foreign jurisdiction. Utterly no protection therein necessary for the EU single market, but just an incursion, an imposition of unnecessary restriction. And it really does reduce to this. Are we a united kingdom? If we are a united kingdom, then the laws of this nation should be made by this united kingdom, not by a foreign jurisdiction imposed on my constituents in 300 areas of law. Laws we don't make and can't change, but are a supplicant rule taker on. And that is so fundamentally wrong. Now, the Minister will tell me, and he's told me before in a rather trite response, oh, that's all because of Brexit. Sorry, it's not. It's because we in Northern Ireland didn't get Brexit. The Windsor Framework denied us Brexit. It kept us. It kept us within the EU's customs union. It kept us within the EU's single market, whereas the rest of the United Kingdom escaped. And that is why we have this absurd situation where we do not get the full benefit of these trade deals. And that is something which I, as a representative from my constituency, say to the other members of this House: why are my constituents less important, less entitled than those of every other member from Great Britain when it comes to these matters? So I do say, and then we have some in this House, and the member for Arbroath is one of them, who wants us to all rejoin the customs union, so that we cannot make trade deals, so that we cannot have a deal with India, we cannot have a deal with any country, because we would only have the deals that someone else would make for us. Such absurdity. But those are the fundamental issues that I would like to see addressed. And as for getting the best of both worlds, sorry, the best of both worlds is a fantasy for Northern Ireland, for a very simple reason. If you might have access into the EU market, as indeed GB does, through its trade deal with the EU, but what you forget is that to bring all our goods from our main market, our raw materials, GB, they have to pass through an international customs border with paperwork and checks and extra costs. And therefore, not Brexit, the Windsor Framework, the denial of Brexit is what causes the REC border. And therefore, the fantasy that, oh, Northern Ireland is some special position, we are in the worst of all worlds. And that is proven by the fact that though we were told that under the Windsor Framework we would become the Singapore of the West, the fact that there hasn't been one extra job created by foreign direct investment proves what a fantasy that is. And the reason it's a fantasy is no company is going to set up on the basis that they can sell into the EU, as they could from GB, and forget about the fact that the raw materials will be subject to an international trade border and the extra cost of that. So that it more than cancels it out. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've probably tested your patience, so I'll leave it there.
Final backbench contribution, Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I, of course, like everybody across this House, as a proud British citizen, support the government's efforts and its intentions, the growth strategy and its efforts to agree mutually beneficial trade agreements between countries after the debacle of Brexit and the loss of the collective bargaining and the benefits that we enjoyed under membership of the EU. I joined my honourable friend, the member for Bradford East, and my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham, Perry Barr, and associate myself with their remarks around the absolute mandatory obligation on Britain to ensure that whatever trade deals we negotiate with whichever country, wherever in the world, that human rights are front and centre in those negotiations. Thousands of my Kashmiri diaspora constituents and their families are suffering. They've been suffering for nearly 80 years, and it's about time that Britain took a lead in helping alleviate the issue of Kashmir, the occupation, the illegal treatment of the citizens there, and the illegal occupation, and allow them the right to self-determination. Building on the issues around human rights, I also, joining them, stand here today to express my profound sadness and disappointment that we are signing a free trade agreement with the leader of a Hindu nationalist governing party that has for decades violently persecuted Muslims, Christians, Dalits and other minorities in India for their religious beliefs or their class status, and the millions of people in occupied Kashmir. Most egregiously, as Chief Minister of Gujarat in 2002, Modi facilitated a pogrom that resulted in over 1,000 individuals, the majority of whom were Muslims, murdered amidst widespread reports of sexual violence, looting and property destruction. The exact death toll of the Gujarat riots is unclear, but it's estimated to exceed 1,000 men, women, children, the vast majority of whom were Muslim. According to Genocide Watch, during the massacres, at least 250 women and girls were gang raped before being burnt to death. A mob of 5,000 people set fire to houses in Muslims in Ahmedabad's Narodia Bhatia neighbourhood, resulting in the death of over 65 people. Before being burned and hacked to death, women and girls were gang raped in public. Their male family members were forced to watch the rapes, and then they were killed. A couple of heartbreaking examples. Hina Kosa from Naroda Bhatia was pregnant when she was raped. Several eyewitnesses testified that she was raped and tortured, and that her womb was slit open with a sword to extract the fetus, which was then hacked to pieces and burnt alive alongside the mother. Bilkis Yaqub Rasul was 5 months pregnant when she was gang raped. 14 members of her family, including her 3-year-old daughter, were murdered in front of her eyes. The Gujarat government has now granted early release to all 11 of her convicted rapists. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was there myself in Ahmedabad on the first day and for the subsequent days of these riots. I climbed to the rooftop of my uncle's home and I watched the city burn around me. Black smoke was bellowing from every direction. I saw firsthand how the leader of a state facilitated and stood by as fanatics murdered, raped and pillaged their way through Muslim communities and neighbourhoods. Modi was complicit in this ethnic cleansing, even if attempts to achieving legal justice have so far proved futile. Since then, he has continued to refuse to accept any responsibility or to apologise for the events that took place, thereby adding insult to injury to the bereaved victims and families. As Prime Minister of India, Modi continues to engage in faith-based oppression of India's Muslim, Christian and other minority populations. Homes, businesses and places of worship are unlawfully and arbitrarily demolished, a phenomenon that Amnesty International has labelled bulldozer injustice. Communal violence against Muslims is rife, with mob violence and lynchings on a daily or weekly basis. So I gently remind the government of how innocent civilians are being treated by this government with whom we are signing this trade deal, and to do everything in its power to get the best deal we can, but without compromising the principles of human rights for all. Muslims, Christians, Dalits and others are relegated to the status of second-class citizens and subject to collective punishment. And instead, the government therefore should pursue an economic diplomacy that recognises the importance of religious tolerance and pushes to promote peaceful coexistence of groups with different beliefs. Signing this trade agreement and with it exchanging a reduction in tariffs for our values sends a dangerous signal to the world that religious bigotry and violations of international human rights law are permissible. Since Brexit, successive UK governments have shifted away from integrating enforceable human rights clauses into trade deals, instead opting for profit over people by adopting a values-free approach that starkly diverges from the human and workers' rights provisions that the EU, albeit imperfectly, championed. Shame on them, I say, and shame on this deal. The government should follow the Human Rights Committee's proposals that standard human rights protections should be included in all agreements and begin to treat human rights as something that applies to all individuals of any religion anywhere in the world. Thank you.
I now come to the Shadow Minister, Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Soggy poppadoms, buses, a lot of whiskey, pottery, bricks, some Galloway cheddar and even an aircraft carrier promoting whiskey. Those are some of the colourful items that were mentioned in this debate which really bring to life the impact across all our constituencies of this UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. And so it's a pleasure to close today's debate on the UK-India Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which forms part of the process that Parliament has adopted of constitutional reform and governance, whereby we spend 21 sitting days scrutinising this particular agreement. And despite the fact that there are other things happening in this building this evening that I think have perhaps distracted some of the attention, particularly on the government benches, I think we have heard that this is an agreement that has a lot of significance. In particular, in my closing remarks, I want to draw attention to a very excellent and detailed speech from my honourable friend, the member for the Weald of Kent, who highlighted some of the potential incentives or the economic incentives that will exist as a result of this agreement in terms of employment of British people versus Indian people to do the same jobs here in the UK. And I'm interested to hear the Minister elaborate his answer to those particular points. And in addition to my honourable friend, the member for Dumfries and Galloway, who raised an important issue around dairy, because while it is the case that today there are no licences for dairy products, as I understand it, coming into the UK from India, that could, of course, change in the future. And it will be interesting to see what process the government would adopt to address that. Now, as my right honourable friend said in his opening speech, free trade is a key belief on these benches, and that is why we pursued the trade agreements with the EU, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and of course the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And indeed it was predecessors in the predecessor government who laid the groundwork for the agreement that we see before us today, and rightly acknowledged in many speeches this evening that it represents a Brexit dividend, the ability to pursue an independent trade policy and to deepen our relationship with one of the world's fastest growing economies. But recognising that that achievement doesn't mean that we can ignore the areas where the agreement falls short. Many of those points were raised by others in this debate. The chair of the Business and Trade Committee made the point that the government risks undermining the benefits of the agreement through its planned 40% cuts to UK export staff. And so I'm going to give the opportunity to the Minister once again to reconfirm to the House that the cut in export support staff does not include staff in India who will be working on the implementation of this deal. The House of Lords International Agreements Committee report highlights the stark disparity in this agreement between goods and services. And for a country whose economy is so overwhelmingly services-based, this imbalance does matter. There isn't any meaningful advance in this agreement on mutual recognition of qualifications, with the deal placing a 36-month target for conclusion on this. But I ask the Minister, what will happen if no agreement is reached within that 36-month period? And as my right honourable friend highlighted, the sequencing of market access is deeply asymmetric, with many Indian exporters gaining from immediate tariff reductions here, while UK exporters face phased access and quotas. A striking omission is that of legal services. The House of Lords International Agreements Committee again said, and I quote, "We view this as a missed opportunity given that legal services comprise a strategically important and growing sector of trade, both in their own terms and relation to supporting trade in other sectors." As others have noted, another concerning omission is the absence of any investment protection. The bilateral investment treaty that was expected to be agreed at the same time remains undelivered. And I'd like to hear from the Minister if he can confirm for UK firms investing in India what his plans and deadline are for implementing an agreement along those lines. When we compare this agreement with the EU-India Free Trade Agreement, the contrast is quite clear. They managed to achieve a full investment protection agreement, and their investors will have a stronger legal certainty than their UK competitors. On agriculture products, my honourable friend was absolutely right to highlight the concerns that farmers have about dairy being an issue in the future. So again, I give the Minister the opportunity to offer to the farmers up and down this country the assurances they would need in terms of the effect that these provisions might have on them in the future. But finally, I think we must address again the double contribution convention. We don't know very much detail about it, but we do know that Indian workers posted to the UK will pay no national insurance, nor will their employers. And at the very same time that British businesses have been asked to shoulder increased national insurance contributions, it's hard to see how ministers can defend a framework that makes it cheaper to hire from abroad than to employ a worker here at home. So can the Minister explain why the government has created a two-tier tax system in which British businesses pay more in national insurance while the employers hiring workers from India pay nothing at all? And what will he do if he sees British workers losing out in large numbers when this measure does come into force? So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, this deal is a welcome opportunity for British exporters to explore new markets, but one with many missed opportunities in areas where the UK should be leading and not lagging. The task now is to ensure that this agreement becomes a foundation and not a ceiling. So will the government treat it as a living agreement, return to the negotiating table, deliver the services access, investment protections and sectoral safeguards that British businesses and workers deserve? And what are the metrics and the milestones that we here in Parliament can use to continue to hold the government to account to accept its role in the implementation of this agreement?
Come to the Minister, Sir Chris Bryant.
By leave of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know you were once in this job, so if I get anything wrong, please feel free to intervene and correct me. First of all, it was a great delight to hear. I'm going to crack through as many of the questions as have been put to me because I know honourable members like to hear answers, so I will try to do that as fast as I possibly can. The honourable member for Arundel and South Downs, great delight, as always, to see him at the dispatch box. He did a bit of a rant about Brexit and how much he's still in favour of it. He's probably be the last person still in favour of Brexit, just as he's still the last person still in favour of the Trust budget because he helped write it. Just on services, he asked specifically about services, and it's a legitimate point that he made about services, which is, first of all, of course, we would like to go further on services. Two things I would just say to him. First of all, we have secured significant advantages in relation to telecoms and in relation to construction services. I've already referred to the better deal that we've had on procurement than the European Union. And of course, what is also part of this is that we've been guaranteed MFN status, most favoured nation status, on 40 different sectors, including accounting and auditing services, architectural services, engineering services, higher education, building cleaning services, photographic services, packaging services, convention services, interior design services, and so on. And I think that goes to the point that the Honourable Lady just made about is this going to be a living process. We don't need to return to the negotiating table. We actually have a structure built into this FTA which enables us to be able to take things forward. And in fact, the first review of the deal will happen on the entry into force date, which I hope will, as I said earlier, will be before the summer. And I'm very keen not to give way to anybody else because there's not much time and I've got to answer all the questions that have already been asked me. About legal services, of course, we would have much preferred to have been able to secure legal services as part of this. We have a very strong legal services sector in the UK. They are excellent. I was with the head of the Law Society in Riyadh last week, celebrating some of the changes that are happening and the opportunities that are happening in Saudi Arabia, for instance. The difficulty is that, as the Indians made it very, very clear in the whole of the negotiating process, law is a noble profession, very specifically understood as such within the Indian constitution. It would have required significant changes to primary legislation in India, and it wasn't something that we were able to achieve. Similarly, of course, we would have preferred to have been able to secure a bilateral investment treaty. We stand ready to start that process whenever India would like to be able to do so. I'm really glad that we have a digital trade chapter, because so many parts of the trade that we now do internationally are digital, and lots of other arrangements don't end up that way. I should just say in reversion to services that it's because of the way we've transacted this that this deal is supported by the Federation of Small Businesses, by HSBC, by Standard Chartered, by EY, by the City UK, by Revolut, and I don't think that they think of it as soggy pogbadoms at all. I think they think of it as a fine tandoori. The honourable friend for Bradford East and several other members referred to the issues in relation to Kashmir, and the honourable member just now gave us some shocking stories about the situation in Kashmir. I was once the curate in High Wycombe, and I know that there's a large Kashmiri population there who have felt many of the issues in relation to Kashmir ever since the 1940s. And of course, we want to make sure, it's been a historic British position, that India and Pakistan need to come to a settlement of their agreement. I should just say that for the purposes of the CETA, the core text chapters define India's territory as set out in India's constitution, but emphasise that this is without prejudice to territorial sovereignty or compatibility with international law. And also, just a really important point which nobody's referred to, but Pakistan enjoys preferential tariff rates when trading with the UK under the Developing Country Trading Scheme, the DCTS, which offers significant preferential access. Approximately 94% of Pakistani goods are eligible for 0% tariffs, and that runs out for India 3 years after entry into force of the FTA. So it is not silent, as it were, in relation to the relationship between the two. I think some honourable members have said that there is nothing in here about human rights. Well, first of all, it's not true. There are provisions. It's also not true to say that none of this is legally binding. The whole of the agreement is legally binding. And there are review processes built into this FTA in a way which I think make it possible for us to be able to monitor human rights. But I would also say, in relation to human rights, that the EU deal doesn't enter into human rights issues either, and traditionally doesn't. We of course want every element of what we engage with in another country to be able to reflect the values that we want to protect. And that, for instance, is an opposition to the death penalty, opposition to forced labour, and so many other things. I'm not going to, if he doesn't mind, just if he lets me finish the point. But A lot of that toolkit lies outside trade. It lies with the monitoring of human rights that our High Commission in India does on a regular basis, and of course we raise all the individual issues that have been referred to. I will give way to him because I can never ever resist him. We used to be on a select committee together.
Respect for the Minister, but in terms of the EU deal not being covered by human rights, we are all covered by the European Convention of Human Rights. You have that umbrella that does not exist for countries like India, and that's quite important, especially because his party and my party are committed to remaining within that framework.
Minister Bryant.
I'm as committed to remaining within the European Convention on Human Rights as I ever was, and so does the UK government, and I think it would be an absolute derogation of our international standing around the world if we were to depart it, which is one of the many reasons that I oppose not only the Conservative Party, which seems to have gone doolally in recent years, but those members who were elected as Conservatives and have now joined another political party. I also want to make it absolutely clear to my honourable friend and to others who've referred to these issues that Kashmiri Britons are of course listened to, and the kind of stories that we heard are ones that do concern us, of course. The honourable member for Witney, he pushed in the other direction in relation to Brexit, but he made a good point, which I completely agree with him in relation to the. I might slightly disagree with him about the precise amount of harm that Brexit has done to our trade opportunities in the UK. But I just note that a very large number of UK businesses no longer export into the European Union, and I think that that is a massive failure for the UK, and that's why we're very keen to secure a better deal with the European Union, and that's what we're working on. He talked about sanctions and Russia, and I know I'm appearing before the Select Committee on which he sits, so he gets many bites of this cherry. I say to my honourable friend, the chair of the committee, that when I come to talk about trade sanctions in the next few weeks, I'm very happy to go into the very specific details that he's raised in relation to Russia. I would just gently say to him that I worry when I hear, well, I get a bit irritated when I hear Lib Dems talking about Russia, because I remember being in this House in 2014 when Russia first invaded Crimea. I know he wasn't in the House, but the Liberal Democrats were members of the government, which, and it's not just this government, but many other governments, essentially allowed Putin to take Crimea with impunity, and that's left us with some of the problems that we have today. So where I completely agree with him is that we need to debilitate the Russian system as much as possible. We have introduced sanctions on entities, including India's Nayara Energy Limited, to make sure that we disrupt Russia's energy revenues. We are undermining the shadow fleet wherever we possibly can. We've taken further sanctions against another 500. I'm very reluctant to, because I've only got another 4 minutes. He's on the Select Committee. He'll be able to ask me as many questions. It won't be 1 second. That's an untruth. And on October the 25th, we said we will extend our ban on imports of oil products refined in third countries using Russian crude oil. My honourable friend for West Dunbartonshire, I will specifically refer to his constituent whose 39th birthday it is today. He knows that I too feel and have met with his constituent's family. It is good that some of the charges against him have already been dealt with and he's been acquitted. We want to see the rest of the charges, and I think there's another 8 charges that have been laid against him, dealt with as swiftly as possible. We make this argument to the Indian government as frequently as we possibly can, and we also believe, he didn't refer to this, but I think he would agree with this point, that we want to make sure that there is a full investigation into his allegations of torture, because that is an important part of us maintaining an open relationship with India. The Honourable Lady for the Weald of Kent made a speech primarily about one specific issue. It was brief and to the point, and for which I commend her. If only I could learn the same. She referred to the double contributions convention. I would just point out to her that it's a very large number of countries that the Conservative government previously did almost identical arrangements with, including not just Chile and Japan, South Korea, all of the EU, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Switzerland, Barbados, Canada, Jamaica, Mauritius, the Philippines, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Northern Macedonia, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, Turkey, and the United States of America. This will not undermine, and this is the finding of the committee, this will not undermine British workers. It won't make it cheaper stupid. This is about highly skilled workers employed by Indian companies on a temporary basis, paying contributions for their own country rather than in the UK. The deal hasn't finally been struck. Negotiations are ongoing, and of course that will be subject to its own process of going through the House, where members will be able to raise it. I'm not going to. I've only got another 2 minutes. The honourable member, the chair of the Select Committee, made lots of good points. I think he slightly he referred to Cragg and said that a votable motion was guaranteed by the then minister in 2010. I was the minister. I'm not sure that I then guaranteed a votable motion, but I take the point he makes about greater scrutiny. And as I say, when I come to talk about the Office of Trade Sanctions implementation, I hope we'll be able to deal with some of the other issues that he referred to. The honourable member for Arbroath and Broughty Ferry referred to higher education. I'm delighted to say, obviously, higher education is one of the things that MFN applies to as part of the deal. And I was proud that the Prime Minister was able to open 2 new campuses, higher education campuses in India when he visited in October. He makes a fair point about the European Parliament's good practice on trade deals, and it's something that I will reflect on. The honourable member for Ferry Barr, I didn't agree with everything that I said, but I understood the sentiment with which he said it. I would just make the point to him that the whole of the agreement is legally binding, the whole thing. And that's why I'm glad that we've secured in our deal chapters that have not previously been in any others. The honourable member for Dumfries and Galloway referred to government figures seeming too low. One of the figures is probably too low, and that's because we've tried to err on a conservative side. In particular, some of these figures presume that we will not be doing any additional trade as a result of the FTA, but I think we will. So I think we could say, well, we will do better. The honourable member for North Antrim said, and I'll end with this point, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, he said that there's an enormous irony of a Remainer such as myself standing here and proclaiming this. Well, the thing is, I deal with the world as I find it, not as I would wish it to be. I can't unmake the past, but I can make sure that we exploit the present to the best benefit of British business, and I think that's what this trade deal does.
The question is that this House has considered the UK-India Free Trade Agreement. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Of the contrary, no? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. That ends the general debate. I'll give the front benches a moment or two to shuffle over.